Hey, my name is Mike, and this is a too long didn't read version of Mannoroth on Mythic. Phase 1 where you have to kill all the summoners doesn't happen. They actually kill themselves because they're stuck in Warlords of Draenor forever. In Phase 2, Mannoroth will be spawning a few ads. Dread Infernals spawn in these green swirlies and teleport around. They deal damage to anyone around them. Fel Imps spawn on players and will deal damage to anyone within 3 yards of their spawn point. They cast Fel Blast, which deals damage to anyone within 3 yards of the player hit. When they reach full mana, they teleport and deal a ton of damage to anyone within 15 yards. Curse of the Legion will be placed on a random player. When it expires or if it's dispelled, that player will take deathly amounts of damage and spawn a Doomlord at their position. Doomlords will put Doomspike on any target they melee, which stacks. Your tank should be getting this. When this effect fades from the tank after about 8 seconds, it deals about 50,000 damage per stack to anyone within 30 yards. He also casts Shadowbolt Volley, which should be interrupted. He'll also target 3 random players with Mark of Doom. This will put a big purple circle around them. Taking damage is the only way to remove this debuff, and removing this debuff will deal damage to anyone within that circle. If damage isn't taken and the Mark debuff expires, then that player dies. Throughout this fight, Mannoroth will do a Glaive combo on the tanks. This starts off with Glaive Thrust, which deals a high amount of damage and puts a 10-second dot on you. This dot is not put on you if you use active mitigation. He'll then do Massive Blast, which also deals a high amount of damage. It knocks you back and increases the amount of damage you take from the blast by 300% for 45 seconds. He'll then do Glaive Thrust one more time. A tank swap is needed after the Massive Blast so that the first tank doesn't die. Fel Hellstorm causes these black circles to appear. Don't stand in them. If you angle your camera all the way above your character, you'll be able to see the fireballs and know where they're landing. Gaze will fear random people for 4 seconds. These people will have a small purple circle around them. Anyone who stands in that circle will split the damage that player takes when they're done being feared. Felseeker causes these green circles to spawn. It spawns on a random ranged player or healer. Mannoroth will cast this 3 times in a row, each circle being bigger than the last and dealing more damage. Standing in this circle also knocks you in an appropriate direction. This may be helpful in actually getting out of Felseeker at times. At 65%, phase 3 starts and a couple new abilities are added to the mix. The first ability is Shadow Force, which selects 3 random people and starts pushing them off the platform. The second ability is Wrath of Gul'dan, which is a 40 stack debuff put on 5 random players consisting of 2 melee, 2 ranged, and a healer. The goal is to have designated people soaking everyone's Wrath stacks. Soaking Wrath will put Gripping Shadows on you. This deals a little bit of damage, but also puts a stacking debuff on you for 15 seconds that increases the damage this deals by 25%. At 35%, the 4th and final phase will start. This phase only empowers some of his abilities. Empowered Gaze will now spawn a gray puddle on the ground. The size of this puddle depends on the amount of people who are in the purple circle when the person stopped being feared. Empowered Shadow Force now pushes everyone. Empowered Massive Blast now stuns the player it hits and also shoots out 3 damaging waves in front of Mannoroth. Empowered Fel Hellstorm just happens more frequently, and Empowered Felseeker now deals raid-wide damage based on your distance from the circle. My guild pre-potted for the pull. By the time Mannoroth becomes active, you have about 8 seconds left on it, which is better than nothing. When Mannoroth became active, we used the legendary ring and all of our offensive cooldowns excluding Bloodlust. We used 3 tanks for this fight as it made dealing with Doomlords much easier. We pulled Mannoroth towards the purple pillar as Gul'dan destroys 1 pillar every transition, ending with the purple one. The first Curse of the Legion is dispelled as quickly as possible and all DPS then switches to the Doomlord. The Shadowbolt Volley should be interrupted as late as possible to give you as much time before Mark of Doom goes out. We were able to have the legendary ring explode on the Doomlord, killing him before he casted Mark of Doom. If this Doomlord does cast Mark of Doom or when you deal with it with later Doomlords, my guild had the effective players form a line right by the pillar. 1 player was on each end of the pillar while the 3rd player was in the middle on the tanks. When the Doomlord came out, the tank that wasn't currently tanking Mannoroth would taunt the Doomlord to get 1 stack of Doomspike before the 3rd tank taunted him back. This Doomspike would hit the 3 marked players and remove their debuff. Keep in mind the Death Knights can use Anti-Magic Shell and Rogues can use Cloak of Shadows when they get cursed to remove it without spawning a Doomlord. Throughout the entire fight, we made sure we were always inside Mannoroth's hitbox. This ensured that all the imps were able to be death gripped onto the boss when they spawned. Upon being gripped, they were stunned and burned down by melee and a couple warlocks. When the imps died, we had melee move to the opposite side of the boss while the range stayed where they were. They all stacked up to the side of Mannoroth right on the edge of his hitbox, and when Felseeker went out, they would join the melee on the opposite side of the boss. You can use the first Felseeker to help launch you over to the side as it doesn't deal that much damage on the first circle. Or you can set up warlock portals. Once on the other side, the entire raid would stack up as tightly as possible for Gaze. This ensured that all feared players were on top of each other and we didn't have to run in multiple directions to save people. We had all the range run out for these. Once the Gaze went out, we would once again spread out around the boss. Around this time, the first set of Infernals spawned. If possible, they were moved closer together and towards the boss with grips or typhoons. The ranged were in charge of killing these as quickly as possible. After the imps spawned and died again, the melee would move over to the other side, and the range would stay where they were once again waiting for Felseeker. We just ping-pong back and forth the entire fight until we got to the next phase. When we got close to 65%, we always had the 3rd set of imps spawning. When they spawned, spawned, we popped the legendary ring to power it up. Shortly after they died, another curse of the Legion went out and was dispelled as quickly as possible. All DPS would switch to this Doomlord and burn him down before he casted Mark of Doom, as we were transitioning or already in Phase 3. It is possible to successfully transition into Phase 3 with Marks of Doom out, but it's very difficult. If needed, you could always slow DPS, kill the last Doomlord before 65%, and then push the boss. The first thing that happens in Phase 3 is Wrath, which is why having Marks of Doom is pretty much a wipe. The two melee marks for Wrath were around where Mannoroth's back feet were. The two ranged marks for Wrath were about halfway down his tail and the same distance apart as melees. We had designated people going into the middle of this square to soak up all 4 Wrath stacks by using their immunities, which made them not take any damage from gripping shadows. Hunters can deterrence, mages can ice blocks, and paladins can bubble. The healer who had Wrath would find a tank and stand next to them until they needed to switch which tank absorbed their stacks. We always tried to use the mages' immunities last, as if they were targeted for Shadow Force, they would not be pushed off the platform. Shortly after the first set of imps spawned, all the players with Wrath ran into the raid and spread out the remaining stacks. Everyone else who didn't get Wrath at the start of the phase ran in front of Mannoroth so they could have their back to a pillar for Shadow Force. It also gave us a very limited space for feared players to run. If you have Wrath and you get Shadow Force, it may be helpful to have a Warlock portal in the middle of the platform. You can also try to push yourself towards the red pillar if at all possible. When stacking in front of the boss, make sure not to stand too close to each other due to the Hellstorm and the AoE that imps do when spawning. Felseeker in this phase was baited out of the raid. All the ranged players fanned out around the boss, so when it spawned away from the rest of us. For Mark of Doom, we used the same positioning as we had before, except we couldn't have those affected players standing on the pillar or else they'd kill all of us, so we just had them move up to around where Mannoroth's tail was. After the second gaze in this phase, we popped every single offensive cooldown and used our second potions to try and push Phase 4 as quickly as possible without another Doomlord spawning. Once again, a Doomlord in this phase is theoretically doable, but it's very difficult. If you do get Mark of Doom in Phase 4, you can run to the purple pillar to take damage. As we're pushing Phase 4, we also move the boss closer to the center of the room. This is because that pillar goes away and starts shooting out fel energy around it. Once again in this phase, we're making sure that we're inside Mannoroth's hitbox for imps. When Wrath goes out, we have the affected players run away from the entire raid but still DPSing Mannoroth. Soaking these isn't really a concern in this phase, however, we do call out one of the affected players at a time to come into the raid to spread their stacks around. We try to stay relatively stacked up behind the boss so that gaze is easy to soak. We don't assign specific people to soak, we just had the ranged call out who they were soaking if they were. If no one called anything out, people just looked to see if anyone was soaking a gaze. If someone was in a gaze, they'd move on to the next one. We tried to only have one person soak each gaze to keep the puddle as small as possible. The puddles that spawn reduce your movement speed, which is why we pushed ourselves into them for Shadow Force. Using Warlock portals or Druid wards during this Shadow Force is definitely helpful as well. Just like in Phase 3, we also bait Felseeker out of the raid for this phase. Defensive cooldowns can be used if you get Curse of the Legion, on the tanks during Glaive combo, during Gaze, when the Wrath group comes into the raid to spread their stacks, and or during Shadow Force in the last phase. That was a too long didn't read version of Mannoroth on Mythic. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Thanks for watching and have a beautiful day!